I have donated the flood slides of 1955 to the Monroe County Historical Association so that all of you may see the damage in our area and make preparations in case it ever should hit our area again. The flood was a result of two hurricanes, Connie, August 3rd, and Diane, the 18th and 19th. Damage from the streams was accumulative. Connie saturated all the ground and the side hills and brought a great deal of debris down. When Diane came along and she just carried the debris down to our streams, the water came down in surges right down the streams to the Delaware River. The picture of Diane, which drowns the Delaware Valley, is from the Eastern Express. It was from a publication that they put out right after the flood. The Eastern Express is now called the Express Times, and they gave the Historical Society permission to use the publication slide. The area was pretty much damaged from an accumulation of water in Devil's Hole, which is near Mount Pocono. A railroad comes through this area, and on both sides of the railroad are two hills. Debris was carried down on the railroad, which formed a natural dam, and it backed up into the area. At this time, the Civil Defense gave me the position of evacuating the college, and after the evacuation, I worked with the college in transferring people from our dormitories to homes of relatives and friends. The next job was to go out of town and bring in supplies, which I was able to do, having taught in Schuylkill Haven and the Pottsville area. I hope that you will learn from these slides. At the time, Civil Defense reports that there were 78 lives lost, 44 bridges destroyed, and most all of the utilities destroyed. The WPA, back in Depression years, had worked on the streams, cleared debris, but they also changed the course of some of the streams. The problem then was that in time of high waters, the streams went back to their natural habitat. Many local people volunteered to help us in the time of the flood. This was a local volunteer, and this is a road between Route 209 and 611, Bridge Street, which comes out at the Stroud Mall. The damage here was not too heavy. Going from 209 to 611, these homes were in a problem. Some were untouched. The thing about water is many times it will follow the path of least resistance. What happened here, some of the homes were affected and others were not touched. We've moved down to the bridge that would be the main street in Stroudsburg, over the Pocono Creek, and to the West Main Street area. The water, when coming down the Pocono Creek to its natural channel and back of the Stroud Ford, took down a swinging bridge and took down a great deal of debris and dirt in this area. These are men trying to cross a cement bridge in order to get into the Stroudsburg. This is from West Main Street into Stroudsburg. This is to the right of the bridge. You can see where the dirt has been washed away, close to 20 feet, and that's a high bank. A man is going through what remains of his garage to search out any debris that he is able to do. These are his clothing from that house and household supplies. Going from there down to the area between 9th and 10th Street, these are the remains of my clothes. I had an apartment in my niece's home. My niece and her two sons were able to walk up to 9th Street, and the water was up to their waist. My clothes were carried out, and I paid $75 to have them cleaned, and the smell of sewer water was so bad that I had to give them away. Some of my clothes were stolen. Fortunately, they missed my jewelry box. Big problem in this area after the flood, about 2 weeks after the flood, was the sewer rats from the Pocono Creek, where the bank had been washed away, invading our homes. I killed a very large one in the kitchen with a hot shovel, and all the homes had to be fumigated and the rats were exterminated. Now we're in the area right across from what had been Monroe County Eastern Libraries. This boat with its heavy motor overturned right in front of the library, there between 9th and 10th Street. Now we've moved down to Lower Main Street. The damage here was very bad. We're in the area of Canfield Feed Company, and the problem with many of these houses, everything in was gutted. The only thing that Civil Defense could do was arrange for the area and the debris to be bulldozed into one area and then picked up by front-loader trucks. This house had to be taken down. The golf service station just beyond it is still standing. This is opposite, right there at 3rd Street, and you can notice the water line. Notice the seal test sign at tops, and the Cornish board right after that, lower than that, was taken out. In this area, the water rose 9 feet in 15 minutes. People were evacuated as fast as possible. Fortunately, there was no loss of life in this immediate area. This is the 5th Street after the National Guards came in, and he's right at 5th and McConnell Street, stopping people from going down into the flooded area. I talked to a woman who lived up in this area, and she said when the water came, it made such a noise that it sounded just like a freight train traveling at full speed. And this is the McConnell Street, the remains of what had been McConnell Street in the 3rd and 4th Street area. The only thing they could do was to bulldoze the debris to the side. Still McConnell Street, heading towards 5th Street. And this is 1st Street. The left is the Vassar Pocketbook Factory. The homes on the right were invaded with water, and the only thing they could do was to take shovels and just shovel their furniture and debris out into the street, which was later picked up. We're now at the bridge between the two towns. This is the Citizens Gas Company, and one of their buildings right in back of the gas company. Notice there's a car under the fallen roof. And on the bridge at the left-hand side, and now we're still on the Strasburg side, there had been a tavern which was destroyed, and both this tavern and the house had to be torn down. And crossing from the Strasburg area into the East Strasburg area, I talked to a man who said that he watched the bridge float away. He said when it was picked up, it was just like a matchbox floating on water. And of course, it was carried, the one side, Strasburg side, was carried a great distance away, and we're on the East Strasburg side. Notice the school bus and the car that is under the bridge. Children loved it. They didn't have to start school in September. As you cross into the East Strasburg side, right at the bridge, Washington Street joins Brown Street, and on that V has stood A.M. Price's garage. It has been replaced with a little park. This would be the Washington side of the area. Notice the Bell Telephone people repairing lines. The company brought in a great many men to work as fast as they can, and they were housed up at the college. In back of the A.M. Price's garage was Harry Heller's meat and supply house. He and his wife went to the basement to turn off the refrigeration units and couldn't get out the door, so they went to the 2nd floor, crawled out of a window, and stayed in the tree all night until rescued. Now, this is right alongside the Armory. Looking over towards Brown Street, there had been in the distance a little tavern called the Bucket of Blood. What you're looking at is sewer mud, and the odor was so strong that if you stood over the sewer mud, you could feel faint within just a few seconds. Very strong. And of course, they worried very much about a typhoid epidemic. We're now in back of the Armory, and you can notice the damage done there with the cars upturned, and looking towards Brown Street and Lincoln Avenue. This is still on Washington Street. That was the former American Legion building. Bowling alleys and 1st floor was all under the heavy waters and sewer mud. In back of the American Legion, the stream takes a curve here, and many bodies were found up into this area, and also in cars and other debris, right in back of the Legion. Now you're looking at the Broadhead Creek, runs between Strasburg and East Strasburg. East Stroudsburg Lumber Company had been situated right about where the Salvation Army building is now. The lumber recovered from the flood. Some of the boards were found in Philadelphia, marked East Stroudsburg Lumber Company. It was carried down the Delaware River. I felt sorry for this man. He was standing in sewer mud, and his job could not have been a very pleasant one. Now this is Brown Street coming across the bridge from Stroudsburg to East Stroudsburg and going to the right. This is the back part of A.M. Price's garage. And at the bridge on the East Stroudsburg side had been a service station, a double house and a single house, and textiles mill. This is right at the bridge. Of course, this had to be demolished eventually. Those two cars came from the garage there at A.M. Price's. The textile mill, which now has been torn down, to be used as a parking lot for the new Walmart store. You can see just a little bit of the foundation of the two houses. Looking there at the bridge between the textile and the service station, you can see an apartment house that had existed, which is now Walmart parking lot. Going down Lincoln Avenue. Now Lincoln Avenue, on the right would be a Walmart store, on the left would be the Burger King and Kmart and other stores. This houses were at the end of the street, just about where the Walmart store is now. Notice the high water line on the telephone pole. Cries for help could be heard at the university, and they could not get to these people because of the electrical wires. I heard from several people that anywhere from 3 to 5 people lost their lives in these homes. We're now down in what they used to call Mill Flats, which is the Walmart area. And these houses now had to be demolished, many of them, and you can see for yourself the damage done. Again, it didn't matter whether you were a house made of brick or stone or wood. If you were in the path of the water, it was wiped out. These are on East Stroudsburg side, just there under the bridge. Now we've moved from Lincoln Avenue over into the Lenox area and Brewer Street between East Stroudsburg High School and the East Stroudsburg Playground, Dansbury Park. And these are scenes within that area. Now these were good macadam roads, and of course they were all destroyed. Trees were brought down into this area. That's a 1955 new TV set. Now we've moved to the entrance from Day Street to Barnum Street. Okay, that would be coming just in back of East Stroudsburg Playground. The only thing the men could do was to use the bulldozer, shove the dirt to the side to get to Barnum Street. And this man and his wife sat on the roof all night long. People in this area said that the most frightening part of the flood was the sound of the projectiles, which actually were propane tanks breaking loose from houses. Said when they went through the water, it sounded just like a torpedo. This gentleman, I heard, hiked from Canadensis down to help the home of his aunt and uncle. And this is one of our National Guards. When I began to go out of town to get supplies, I began to bring in water to be used or lemonade and stuff that people made and passed it out to the National Guard because they were on duty for many hours. When I began to evacuate people from the college, I picked up this woman, and I have tried very hard to find out who she is. And I still do not know her, but I transported her from the college infirmary to up near Bushkill. She was quite upset and worried because her fiancé had given her her wedding and engagement ring, and it had been in the trailer, which is you see in the distance. The trailer had been carried 1 or 2 blocks from this area and lodged against an old barn. It was almost filled with mud. The gentleman that was on the porch cleaning knew this woman, and he went over to look for the rings, opened the door, opened a drawer just inside the door, and found the rings. I was then able to transport her to the relatives near Bushkill. This is typical of the many telephone poles. Now this would be just in back of the Broadage Creek. That's my hand, and I say that quickly because people think it's more than that. This is looking at East Stroudsburg Playground. I'd taken the picture out of my window. Holland from Holland had suffered in a previous flood, and we had gone to help them. When our flood happened, they sent several hundred tulip bulbs over to be replanted in this area. The Army burned almost all cans and food supplies from the stores because there was danger of an epidemic, and it was burned in East Stroudsburg Playground. They still had to keep people from coming in and taking some of the canned supplies. In back of Washington Street, there at Day Street, which is next to Rudy's Tavern, was a small trailer court. The people were all evacuated safely. Their trailers, however, were carried. This one is just lodged against the Old Town Garage area. And we're still on Day Street. You can see how powerful the water must have been. Right in back of this little trailer court was a building that the East Stroudsburg firemen operated as a recreation center. On this particular day, there was a bingo game going. The firemen went in and told the women there playing bingo about the flood and advised them to get out. However, 5 women refused to leave without their husbands. When the water came up, 3 lost their lives and 2 swam to safety. Typical of many of our streets. Now we've moved into the area back of East Stroudsburg High School, again back near Lenox Avenue, Rober Street, Burr Street, in that area. Notice again a bus of some type, just the top of the bus, and these have been macadam roads. The sign on this, what it remains of the home, says, "Do not enter. Walls and foundation unsafe." Again, at the turn of the Broadest Creek, near the Stokes' Mill area, deposited some cars into this area, which of course later on were transported out of the area. Damage was severe. This house belonged to another foundation, and it was carried a short distance away, as you can see from the foundation. I was told that a man was able to evacuate his family, went back to get his 3 dogs and could not get to them. They were later found on the streets in Stroudsburg and East Stroudsburg. Traveling to the Minnesink Hills, there had been a road bridge and a railroad bridge going across the Broadest Creek right past what had been the Empire Box Company. You can see part of the company is destroyed. Now these pictures were taken 3 to 5 days after the flood, so you can see where the water has gone down. This is the foundation of the road bridge. You can see that it's practically all gone. And to the right, there had been the railroad bridge, and of course that was destroyed. And we've moved up the Shawnee Road to Bushkill, and taking the lady that I told you about with the engagement and wedding rings, and I'm transporting her to Aneria and cousins who lived the other side of the hogback in Bushkill. When I got there, I was told that the family did not know that there was help available, and they had walked from Stroudsburg, from down in the Barham Street area, all the way up to Bushkill. And they didn't have much money, and a man was hiking over the old hogback, which was from the Delaware River, and came out at Bushkill with $2 to see if he could buy some supplies. Of course, I told him that supplies were available and that I would have them delivered. Now, we're right outside of the little village of Bushkill. This car is taking a chance. There's no dirt underneath that road. And we're heading into the village. The golf service station has been renovated, and it's the only part here that is still standing. Notice the 2 school buses. Kids are very happy. And Alton's Playhouse had been on the other side of the road. It was Alton's Restaurant and Playhouse, and it just was picked up, carried over the road, maybe 100 feet, deposited here. The men in Bushkill were working very hard to try to get the bridge repaired so that the people from the Bushkill area and from the Peters House Hotel, which had stood on the Bushkill side, just to the right of the bridge. These were guests on the other side of the stream, and they couldn't get out of the area at all. Bridges were out at both ends of the road. This is Route 209. It's now part of the Park Service. The men were able to use the method that earlier pioneers had used, putting up the logs and then filling it in with dirt and gravel. On the other side of the bridge, now this would be where the Peters House Hotel has stood, was the golf course, which was destroyed, and you notice a great deal of the bank. This is one area where you can see that the stream has returned to its natural channels. We're not quite a half mile from the Delaware River, and it went back to the left, its original channel, right through what had been the golf course. Right above Bushkill had been Cutay's Tavern, and the smell of sewer mud in the tavern was so bad, the only way I could get this picture was to hold my nose and grab the picture and get out of the little area. Now we've left the Bushkill area, and we're down into the Stokes' Mill area between East Stroudsburg and Stroudsburg, where some of the buildings right along the stream was carried to another area. And we're starting the recovery period. The Army built a temporary bridge going from East Stroudsburg, on the East Stroudsburg side to the Stroudsburg side, by putting in culvert pipes and filling it over with stone and gravel. National Guard was there. This is the first connection between the 2 towns. On the Stroudsburg side of the bridge, a man had had a house just built. They were about to move in. The night before, they told me that floors were sanded and so on. And we went back next morning. This was all that was left of the home. Now we're traveling up 5th Street, and this is the bridge and area that the water from the mountains took such a heavy path and a heavy toll. The bridge between 5th Street heading towards Penn Hills, that would be Route 191, traveling over to 447. We're just west of Antelope. You can see railroad cars there on the Antelope side, destroyed. They had just put the airlines back up into place when I came to take the picture. This is about 5 days after the flood. Notice that the tracks are suspended into the air. They couldn't do anything but to take the tracks down and reconstruct the area so that the railroad could get into the Stroudsburg area, East Stroudsburg area. A lumber mill that had existed. We're on just to the left of the bridge, just before Antelope, on Route 447. Railroad car that had been deposited by this home. Now notice these roads near Penn Hills, a resort area. This is their tavern and one of their cabins that had been picked up from the other side of the road and brought down, placed there. You can notice the height of the water. Now this is still the Broadish Creek coming down by the top of that car. They were fortunate enough to be able to get bulldozers in to reconstruct the area, and they were open for Labor Day. Right on the other side of Penn Hills on 447 is Stykes Bridge. Now this is the road going from East Stroudsburg up to Mount Pocono. Stykes Bridge was a beautiful stone bridge which was destroyed. You can see where the water had just taken the whole center of the bridge out. Now notice these next two pictures. Now this is the Canadensis Road leaving 447 and going on Route 191. Now these two pictures I took after the flood, and this picture I took the year before, and standing in the same spot. You can see what has happened in the area. On the Canadensis Road, this had been a beautiful house. The story I heard was that a family of 5 had swam over the creek to the other side and stayed near that barn and were rescued finally with a helicopter. Alongside of it was a nice home that was destroyed. His car had been rolled and tossed. And this is the house right there in that area. Notice the hardwood floors. Henryville, this house was picked up from the chimney and carried about 50 feet. This is on Route 191. Little Henryville gift shop, and right across from the Henryville Hotel. Now we've come back at 191. We're at the Stroudsburg side, which is 5th Street of 191. And we're on the other side of the bridge that you had seen that had come down over the railroad tracks. Looking back, you can see the square, which is the foundation of a garage. Now there had been an old farmhouse here, which had been purchased by a minister from Maryland. He allowed his congregation to use it. There were 44 people in the house. The house was destroyed. They could have walked to safety when the stream was low, but instead they trusted the old farmhouse. 44 lost their lives. 3 survived. The original picture was of the slide, a tall girl and a smaller girl. The smaller girl was able to be in a tree that came down the Broders Creek and was rescued eventually. Another boy, in the 3 that were rescued, he had gone to the theater. And I don't know about the other one, but the stories, unfortunately, they had named this retreat Camp David. And many people hearing it on TV or on broadcast thought all our camps were destroyed. And this was not true. This was Camp David that you heard so much about. Coming down 191 from the railroad bridge, this is the little bridge there at the ministerial camp, which was the camp that Percy Crawford had founded and was later occupied by church groups. There was some damage, but this bridge did survive. We're on North 5th Street. Now, much of the recovery, you could register because everyone was quite worried about the people in the flooded area. The Stroudsburg registration was at Stroudsburg High School, but you had to go down South 7th Street into Bryan Street and turn right and go through what was then the Bars Rhododendron Nursery in order to get to Stroudsburg High School. I was able to take this picture just before the National Guard withdrew from the area. And out on Dreher Avenue, the Army was able to take water from the Caverick Pond in Caverick Resort area, transport it in Army vehicles to the West Main Street area where there had been an ice cream plant. This is where Perkins Restaurant now stands. The water then was purified and carried by trucks throughout the town. People came out in their buckets and got their supply of drinking water and cooking water. This is in front of the Stroudsburg Courthouse. Water's being transferred to one of the trucks. After very little sleep, one of my last trips out of town, I would bring that back water for the family. It was much appreciated. The recovery between the 2 sounds. Now we're standing on the East Stroudsburg side, looking towards the Stroudsburg side. And the men are trying to bring the electrical lines and the glass lines from Stroudsburg into East Stroudsburg. The Grand Theater and the East Stroudsburg Methodist Church. The fire trucks went out and used calcium chloride on the streets, just regular spray to prevent an epidemic. The East Stroudsburg Methodist Church served snacks and cleaning supplies. The Grand Theater kept open so that people would have a place to go. I can't say enough for the help from the Salvation Army truck and Salvation Army people, the Red Cross, and the many, many church volunteers, and the people who worked very hard to help the people who needed to be rescued and also fed and clothed and housed. The coffee was very good. I often stopped and had a cup of coffee at the Salvation Army truck. The woman with the little girl had just received a doll that I had been able to bring from the Schuylkill County area. East Stroudsburg High School was open for evacuees and for supplies. East Stroudsburg Methodist Church. Stroudsburg Methodist Church, where you could get cleaning supplies and typhoid shots. This man had just had his typhoid shot. The Stroudsburg Presbyterian Church, where meals were served. The figure of 9,000 meals was talked about later. Every time anyone went out of town, or the farmers all brought meat and supplies into the area. And unfortunately, many people who were not in the disaster area started to come in for meals, so it was necessary to erect this sign. The bridge between the two towns, the Army and construction crews put up a temporary bridge, and you could hear the pilings that they were putting down for the bridge up at the university. And I arrived just at the completed bridge where traffic was allowed to cross. This is a temporary bridge until the bridge which now exists was built. Now this is the area between West Main Street and Main Street. This is the first bridge that you saw that was down. It was necessary to use large balls to break up the concrete before they could put a new bridge and foundation in. This man is putting in holes to put in dynamite to break up the cement. Unfortunately, on one of the explosions, a high school student who was observing it too closely was killed with a piece of flying debris. The children on West Main Street couldn't get down to the Main Street, so they built a bridge of their own. That's Tony Huffman and her son walking across. Everyone used this bridge. It went out 2 weeks later with high water. The firemen on West Main Street, this would be Bridge Street, built a bridge so that they could get from one area to another in case of their emergency. A temporary bridge being built by the Army, which was a Bailey Bridge, which was erected and then placed over the stream. This would be over the Pocono Creek on Bridge Street. Minnesink Hills and the original road bridge was never rebuilt, but the military tried to build a bridge for the railroad to come in. They built this bridge with the old wood pilings, similar to what our early pioneers had built, and supplies were finally brought into our area. Supplies and food supplies of all types were housed at Pocono Produce and then distributed to people in the needed area. Montgomery and Ward's, which was between 7th and 8th Street. It was a building that was vacant, and all clothing and cleaning supplies were brought to this area, and people could go in and get the necessary equipment that they might need to refurnish their homes or clothing that is needed. This civil defense truck was brought in about 10 days after the flood, and was parked in back of the Stroudsburg Courthouse. 10,000 children from camps throughout the county were evacuated in one day, and I took the picture on the Shawnee Road when I was taking the woman up to near Bushkill. These children are from Camp Wyomissing, Camp Hagen, and Camp Miller. Took all of them out in one day. The churches from surrounding areas came in to help, many groups. The two most noticeable ones were this Mennonite group. The men would come in, would clean the heavy debris, and the women would go in and do the final touching to homes of disabled or elderly. I finished the slides with some of the men working. This is one group from North Penn working in one of the homes. Right at the corner of Lincoln Avenue and Brown Street, there had been a small grocery store, and the men from the church were cleaning out all of the canned goods so that it could be taken to the East Strasburg playground and burned. This is where the Burger King is on Lincoln Avenue. This is the last slide to be transferred. A slide from the North Penn Goodwill Service. And these men brought in all their cleaning supplies and their food and were self-sufficient. They did a terrific job and stayed as long as were needed. I'd like to thank many people who helped with the flood slides and also helped during the flood. In reproducing these slides, I would especially like to thank Janet Miskin, Executive Director of the Monroe County Historical Society, and also Marie Sumner, educator and historian who has served on a committee with me.